Greetings, AP Euro scholars, for our review of Unit 11 on Europe between World War I and World War II. That's the 1920s and 1930s, looking at the review sheet from top to bottom. Freedoms for Soviet women after the Bolshevik Revolution. Now keep in mind this is in the context of a communist dictatorship, but the Soviets, beginning in 1917, gave women full political and full educational equality. And women had the right to contracept, and women had the right to divorce, and by 1920 women had the first abortion rights in all of Europe. British women, two dates you should know, 1918 and 1928. The women's suffrage movement will pay off. In 1918, all men get the right to vote, and all women over 30 with property. Now, 10 years later, in 1928, all women do get the right to vote. In France, women get the right to vote after World War II in 1945. You should know just be aware of the instability in Eastern Europe after World War I. Let's start with Germany, which is not Eastern Europe, of course, but the Weimar Republic is this democratic socialist government that takes over after the Kaiser abdicates, and it is going to be blamed for the very unfavorable Versailles Treaty, for the humiliation that follows, for the reparations, and the proportional party representation on the Reichstag is going to lead to a series of weak coalition governments. There's going to be instability. There's going to be those in the German Reichstag who feel the government is not radical enough, and you have socialists, and you have communists, and you have those who want to roll back the clock, who are more conservative, who are sort of Kaiser and military holdovers. And this is going to lead to the rise of Hitler. More on that later. In Hungary, you have the second communist leader, Bela Kun, who's going to be, that's K-U-N, but maybe it's pronounced Bela Kun. He's going to be thrown out by the Romanian army that's going to invade, and the Hungarian military is going to install a military leader as dictator named Admiral Horthy. In Austria, Engelbert Dollfuss is going to lead the Fatherland Front, and he's going to shut down parliament, and he's going to ban political parties. In Yugoslavia, King Alexander is going to take over the government and abolish the constitution in 1929, and he's going to become essentially a monarchical dictator. And Yugoslavia is going to be this country that's made up of various factions that are forcibly being held together, and this will later fall apart after the fall of communism in the 1990s. And Yugoslavia is made up of these contending groups speaking different languages, many of them at least, different religions, and you've got the Slovenes, the Croats, the Bosnians, the Kosovars, the Montenegrins, and of course the Serbs. Czechoslovakia is the only democracy in Eastern Europe, but it is made up of many unhappy minority nationalities. You've got Magyars who would prefer to be with Hungary, you've got Poles who would prefer to be in Poland, and of course you've got the Slovaks who are the junior partner in the Czech state, and you also have 3 million Germans, and these are the Sudeten Germans that Hitler is going to demand reunification with in the late 1930s. 1923, you should know the French occupy the Ruhr. This is this coal mining industrial region in the Rhineland area of Western Germany near the French border, because the Germans have fallen behind in the reparations payments. The reaction of the Germans is going to be a general strike and passive resistance. The French in turn are going to send in miners to get this coal out, and they're going to seize the German railways. And the Dawes Plan is an American plan to sort of bring peace to this situation and try to help to revive the European economies. And partly this is self-interested. The United States is owed money big time by the French and Brits, who are depending on reparations payments from the Germans. So we loan money to the Germans, and there is a reset payment plan, and the French promise to leave the Ruhr. So the plan here is for the American money to help sort of kickstart the European economy. In the 1920s, Germany suffers hyperinflation. To a certain extent, they're printing their way out of paying these reparations. And when Gustav Strassmann, who's one of maybe the only strong leader between the Kaiser and Hitler. When he's voted into office, he's going to create what's called the Rentenmark, and he's going to replace the old mark with the Rentenmark at a ratio of 1 trillion to 1, which gives you an idea of the staggering impact of this hyperinflation. John Maynard Keynes is going to be an economist, an English economist, who's going to advocate deficit spending to get economies started again when there is an economic depression. And this Keynesianism or deficit spending is going to happen in the Western democracies during the Great Depression. If nobody's got money, it's the government's job to get things rolling again, is the theory. Mussolini's rise to power, you should know the Italian fears behind his rise to power. He's not when the Bolsheviks take over in Russia in 1917, they represent only about 5% of the Duma. The Italian fascist party of Mussolini is a mass party, has millions of supporters, and the fear here is fear of communism. And in Italy, after the war, there are strikes. There is a large communist party. There's land seizures, and Mussolini is going to he's going to take advantage of this fear of the spread of Marxism. People are watching Russia. They're watching this dictatorship. They're watching the confiscation of public property or private property. They are watching the persecution of the church and the arrests of people being sent off to Siberia and put in the work projects and the shooting of priests and monks. The fascist party's beliefs. Fascism believes, the key idea here is a strong state and a strong leader that represents that state. So Mussolini is going to, nickname for him is Il Duce. He's the leader of a state that does not believe in democracy, does not believe in parliamentary argumentation, because this is divisive. It's the type of thing that is allowing Italy to be torn apart by these contending political groups, many of them Marxists, many of them socialist, communists, and such. And fascism is also anti-Semitic, so it's anti-democratic, anti-parliamentarian, it's pro-strong leader, pro-strong unified state, and it's anti-Semitic. The Spanish Civil War, the sides here are here's the scenario. You have in 1936 what's called the Popular Front. Various groups will create a coalition through a free election, and the largest group are the Spanish Socialists, but they're going to be joined by the Spanish Communists. And this is called the Popular Front government. It's democratic, and this when Spain falls into civil war, they're called the Republicans. The Spanish Republic is going to be attacked by the military led by Franco, or Franco we say in English, and Franco's party are the Falangists. The Falangists are Spanish fascists, believers in a strong state, very anti-communist, and Franco is going to lead the military against the Republican government for 3 years between 1936 and 1939, and ultimately he is going to win. Franco will be dictator of Spain from 1939 until his natural death in 1975. The allies of Franco are these other fascist states. You do have the Germans and the Italians sending him soldiers, sending him money, sending him military supplies. Very famously, the German Condor Legion is going to bomb and obliterate the town of Guernica, which is famously painted in this Pablo Picasso painting. Hitler's rise to power. You should be familiar with his use of modern technology, propaganda, culture, education, religion to gain support. When he is on the rise, he's using political rallies and posters and marches, and he's got a party newspaper, and he's got these stormtroopers in their uniforms, and they've got flags, and there's this pageantry. But in power, he's going to use censorship. He's going to control, he's going to keep out items which are against him, and there's going to be control of books, control of newspapers, control of film, control of art, and he's going to be very much against degenerate art, degenerate music such as jazz. There's that movie Swing Kids about these Hitler Youth who on the side are jazz and dancing, and you've got he's against this abstract expressionist art. In the schools, you're going to have a Nazi curriculum, and very anti-Semitic. You have a requirement young boys are going to be in the Hitler Youth. And in religion, remember, think back to Luther here. Who's in charge of the church if the Pope isn't? Well, it should be the state. The state should be defending the church. And you have the Lutheran Church is going from then on is going to be supported by the government, and the Lutheran Church is going to have a Reich bishop, and they're going to call themselves the German Christians. You have swastikas in Lutheran churches, and you have the firing of all clergy. Not that there's that many of them who have Jewish roots, and you're going to have sort of the control of culture at every level here to instill and to indoctrinate Nazism. The first target of the Nazis coming to power are going to be not the Jews, but the leftists, the communists, and the social democrats and the unions. The hammer's going to come down upon them, the political opponents of Hitler. And the Communist Party, after the Nazis, is the second largest party in Germany at this time. At the time of him coming to power in 1933. The SA are the stormtroopers, and this is the Nazi paramilitary. These are these goose-stepping thugs, wearing these uniforms, supporting the party and beating up socialists. And there's a lot of riots between of course, the socialists and the communists have their own goons. So there's a fair amount of political anarchy at the time that Hitler's coming to power in the depths here of the Depression in the early 1930s. Religion versus fascism. Well, in Italy, Mussolini is going to sign with the Pope what's called the Lateran Treaty. What this does is, remember, the Italian revolutionaries under Cavour and Garibaldi have basically taken all of the church's property. They've taken the Vatican, they've taken the Papal States, they've taken the churches and the monasteries. And Mussolini is going to, very cleverly, is going to basically buy peace with this very dominant Catholic Church by paying an indemnity for property that was taken. He's going to give the Vatican property properly to the Pope, and technically, you look in the Guinness Book, the Vatican is the world's smallest sovereign state, and this happens under Mussolini's. Catholicism is going to be this official religion of Italy, and Mussolini, to top it off, he doesn't have a religious bone in his body, but he's going to marry his mistress in a Vatican and a Catholic wedding ceremony. So Mussolini is co-opting the Catholic Church. In Germany, you have the official state church. The Lutheran Church is going to have a Reichsführer and swastikas in the church and no Jewish-born clergy, and it's going to be very rah-rah Nazi government. And there's going to be a minority dissenting church, and this is called the Confessing Church. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer is this very notable German theologian from a very well-to-do Berlin family who, through joining the German intelligence services, has avoided being put on the front lines in combat. And he is this very young, brilliant theologian, Junker family, who has a religious conversion. And he confesses, and really never to having read the Bible, even though he's a pastor and theologian and a writer. And he becomes convicted. Basically, the short of it is that Nazism is evil. And the Confessing Church at first is going to break off over the issue of the independence of the church from the state. And then the Confessing Church itself is going to divide over the treatment of the Jews. And that's going to be a minority of the Confessing Church. And Bonhoeffer is going to write a very famous book called The Cost of Discipleship. What does it mean to follow? Christ? And he is going to be arrested for helping. He's going to be in on a plot to kill Hitler, but he's specifically going to be arrested for helping Jews to escape to Switzerland. In 3 weeks before the Allies liberate Flossenburg concentration camp, he is going to be hanged. The Vatican's response to anti-Semitism, unfortunately, there is, maybe this is my editorial comment here, there's a lot of criticism of the Pope for not doing enough. Keep in mind, the Pope does not have an army. The Pope in 1937 issues an encyclical, which normally they're always in Latin. This encyclical is written in German. It's read from German pulpits, and this is in 1937. This is 2 years before the invasion of Poland, and the war breaks out, and it's called Mit brennender Sorge, and I may not be pronouncing my German correctly here. MIT Brennender, BRENNENDER, and SORGE. Mit brennender Sorge is a slam. It's a condemnation of racism. The Pope did hide in the Vatican and in the area of Rome thousands and thousands of Jews. And the chief rabbi of Rome, a man named Israel Zolli, Z-O-L-L-I, was so convicted, so moved that he converts to Catholicism. So perhaps, it's a little bit of a abstract argument what the church could have and how much they could have spoken out, but they did speak out, and the church did hide Jews. This doesn't mean that all Catholics and all clergy are off the hook here, but the Vatican's response was not one of support, certainly, of Nazism. In the late 1930s, you should know the French Popular Front is, I believe the date here is approximately 1934, is going to come to power democratically, and this is like the Spanish Popular Front. This is a coalition of socialists and communists in reaction to fascist riots around France and an attempted coup in Paris. And the groups are the socialists, the communists, what are called the radicals, which is a center-left party, and the trade unions. And they're going to stand against the growing fascism in France, and specifically two groups, the Action Française and the Croix de Feu. And these are groups that are, advocating, strong government on fascist lines, kind of, anti-parliament, anti-democracy, anti-Semitic. And you do have the Vichy government is going to be ferociously anti-Semitic. This is the government that Hitler is going to put into power in the occupied area of the southern two-thirds of France. And the French Popular Front is going to legalize unions, is going to institute a 40-hour week and paid vacations, and is going to authorize strikes. And this is a very sympathetic government to workers and to unions. And one of the great failures of the Popular Front is there is striking. There is union agitation in armament factories at the time when the Germans are marching into the back door of France through Belgium one more time in 1940. So the USSR, you should know, after 1914, you have what's called war communism. This is where Lenin and the Bolsheviks take over the banks and the factories and the railroads. And the NEP, the new economic policy, is once the Civil War is over in 1921, the Soviet economy it's dead. It's just dead. And Lenin permits, and this is very contra-communist theory here, he permits free enterprise, private ownership of businesses, with the exception of what he calls the commanding heights of industry, and these would be the railroads and the banks and the big industrial mills here. But what's going to happen is the economy will revive until Lenin dies in 1924, in which case you have Stalin is going to come to power, and he's going to end the NEP. And there's this power struggle between Stalin and Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky, if you remember, was the leader of the Red Army during the Civil War, and Stalin is this general, he's this bureaucratic secretary in charge of sort of management of the party, and he's going to basically take over. And there's this argument between them. Stalin is an advocate of what's called socialism in one country, and that's consolidating the revolution. Remember, there's been this long civil war. There's been this invasion by tens of thousands of Americans, and Brits, and Japanese, and Czechs, and all these people trying to roll back the clock here. And Leon Trotsky is an advocate of spreading the revolution far and wide internationally. Collectivization is the taking over of private farms and making these mass farms. Some of them have 10,000 farmers using industrial equipment. The plan here is to rationalize and to make farms more efficient. But the people who are losing their land are called the kulaks. Kulaks are the private independent farmers. And in Ukraine, they're going to rebel. They're going to hide their grain, not turn over their animals. And Stalin is going to order the army in, and he's going to have the army take this food and it's called the Holodomor. This is the Ukrainian term for the mass killing through starvation of Ukrainian farmers, of these kulaks. And depending on where you look, these numbers, I don't know if the Soviets ever kept a record of how many people they killed here in Ukraine, but the lower number is around 2.5 million, the higher number is around 7.5 million. This is a mass killing. Perhaps it's a genocide since it's mostly Ukrainians, but it's not only Ukrainians, it's other Russians, of course, in this forcible collectivization of agriculture in the Soviet Union. Stalin's 5-year plans, these are these plans that come out of Moscow setting targets for industrial goals. How much steel to make, how much electricity to produce. how much cement to make, and so forth. And Stalin is going to arrest millions and millions and millions of people, some of them for dissent and theoretical crimes against the state, but most of this is all trumped up charges to get people to work as sort of a slave workforce, building hydroelectric dams and working in mines and building work projects in cities and sort of forcibly urbanizing, industrializing this new communist utopia, the Soviet Union. Many are in Siberia doing work projects in that harsh environment. The Great Purge from 1936 to 38. This is the arrest of approximately 600,000 what are called the old communists. These are the the hardcore communists that have supported Lenin, supported Stalin, that have fought in this civil war, that have fought against the invading armies of foreigners. And Stalin is suspicious that he might have, those who are disloyal, those who are against him, and he just orders the arrest en masse of these large numbers. So Stalin is wiping out any possible opposition. This is going to include the majority of the military, generals and high officers in his army, which is going to leave the army very weak when the Germans invade later in Operation Barbarossa. As far as Ireland, here at the bottom of our review sheet, 1921, after World War I, you have the creation of the Irish Free State, and the Free State is what's called a dominion, in which you have self-rule, kind of like Canada, kind of like Australia, New Zealand at this time, but you're technically legally under the king, who sends over what's called a governor general. So symbolically here, many Irish are not happy that they're still under the British. And from 1921 to 23, there is a civil war between those who want a republic and those who are willing to have dominion status to get freedom at all. And the Irish Republican Army, which is going to be the military arm of Sinn Féin, which is the Independence Party, the Irish Republican Army is also fighting. They also want Ulster, the northern 6 provinces, which become part of the United Kingdom. They want that to be part of Ireland. So ultimately, the Free State is going to win this war. But in the 1930s, you're going to have Eamon de Valera is going to be elected, and he's going to lead Ireland into republic status, and that's going to happen after World War II. By the way, the Irish sit out World War II. They're neutral. There's no way they're going to officially be on the side of the British, who have exploited and oppressed them for so long. Ulster is the Irish name for Northern Ireland. It's actually 9 counties. 3 of them are in Ireland, 6 of them are in Northern Ireland. And why does Northern Ireland not vote to join Ireland? Well, they're about 2/3 Protestant, mostly Presbyterians. Many of them are these Scots-Irish that were brought over as planters and settlers to sort of consolidate this British hold on the island of Ireland. And this is going to lead through the 1990s into what are called the Troubles. And this is sort of a low-intensity civil war between the Irish Republican Army, representing the unhappy Catholics, against the dominant Protestant government and civil service and so forth. But more on that as we move farther into European history. All right, guys, that's your review. Good luck.